The promise to take away our sufferings and our worries, but they ended up taking our dignity and our fame away. That is coming from Manziba. Of course, did I forget to introduce our lovely interpreter, the summarizer in the Akan language? Anna Moa will be in the house to do that for us. My guest on the program today, Dr. AMANOR LARTEY and Dr. MALIHA ABUBAKARI. Welcome to the studios of Radio In before the program.
Thank you very much, Collins.
I'm sure the week has been eventful after our last meet.
Yes, it has been so. We exams over and
leave started.
Yes, leave started. So I think is it day 2 or 3 or 4?
Oh,
is it because I'm enjoying the leave? Have you forgotten the number?
You see, so I could call this one a recall from leave, which I wouldn't pay for.
Well, though we are on leave, I doubt if we are on leave. You come to the faculty and every lecturer is around, seeing to our longest students and so on. So we are virtually not on leave, though we are on leave, but we are still working for God and country.
For God and country, so says Dr. MALIHA. Well, today we promised our listeners that we're going to look at the second term of President Jerry John Rawlings. Yes, he had the first term from 1993 to 1997, if I'm right. Good, that's 4 years.
Yeah, from 92 to 96.
Actually, 93 to 96, because swearing was on 7th January 1993.
Perfectly. That is why I was talking about 93 to probably 96. But he handed over he handed over to himself 97.
Well, actually, it's just
January.
93 to 96. 93, 94, 95, 96.
6.
So that makes it 4 years.
Yeah, it's 4 years.
Yeah. Okay, 3 inclusive.
Yeah.
Perfect. At the inaugural ceremony on the 7th of January 1997, President Rawlings had something to say. Let's take down before we jump into our discussions for today.
Mr. Vice President, the Right Honorable Mr. Speaker, His Lordship, the Chief Justice, the Honorable members of the Council of State, our most distinguished and great Reverend Louis Farrakhan and his family, Honorable Ministers of State, distinguished members of the Diplomatic Corps, the Chief of the Defense Staff and Service Commanders, Honorable Members of Parliament, Nimeng, Nananum, Queen Mothers, once again, Willowmane, and Willoye. My beloved countrymen and women, let me on behalf of my family,
Windy Bay,
especially
98.3
my most beloved
FM.
wife, and on behalf of Professor J.E. Mills and his dearest wife, express our thanks to you, the noble people, for the confidence you have reposed in us by your mandate. Mr. Speaker, I wish to commend Mr. J. Kufuor and Dr. Edward Mahama for their contribution to sustaining the democratic process. I am very pleased that their parties, namely the NPP, the PNC, and the PCP are now represented in Parliament. Honorable Mr. Speaker, the NDC through its representatives, numbering 133 in the House, will strive to maintain the best possible relationship with the 66 representatives of the minority parties. Ladies and gentlemen, we seek to work in close consultation with all parties and political interests through the legislature and in such fora as may be appropriate for the sustenance of dialogue and goodwill. Honorable Speaker, fellow countrymen and women, and on my part, ladies and gentlemen, I pledge once again to do my duty to all my people in this country and to ensure that our administration will be responsible and very responsive to its onerous tasks in the spirit of love and truthfulness. My brothers and sisters, once again, I thank you most sincerely. May God continue to bless this beloved nation and each and every one of you. Thank you very much.
I guess we'll say it's a very short inaugural address delivered by President Terry John Rawlings with his running mate and the Vice President at the time, Professor Evans Atta Mills. What a biting speech.
Yeah. Very short for an inaugural speech. But we see not much was said in terms of direction that the government was going to take. Well, this one just mere formality, making a speech and thanking few people. And it is also quite interesting that he mentioned the opposition parties, most especially KOFI, who had lost elections, and Nasigri Mahama. And we also hear him talking about parliament and the fact that the majority will work with the minority. And that was the first time that in the fourth Republican Parliament they were going to have opposition parties in parliament. And it was quite an interesting parliament, looking at what happened and the personalities who were in parliament for the opposition.
I'm sure that will do just for the inaugural speech. Let me get your side of it. Then we'll come to look at how different the second term election was compared to the first term, where the presidential was held on a different date and then the parliamentary was held on a different date. The reason the minorities boycotted the parliamentary, one of the reasons that led to the boycotting of the parliamentary election by the minority parties. Dr. ABUBAKARI.
Good evening, Collins, and good evening to, do I say our listeners or your listeners?
Our listeners and our viewers on Facebook.
And our viewers on Facebook. That was indeed very brief. I would want to play the role of an interpretivist here to try to venture into the mind of Rawlings
and unpack his thinking.
Yes, as to why he gave such a very brief inaugural. No, that was not an inaugural. Was that inaugural? Yeah. Swearing-in speech? Inaugural speech? Yes, inaugural speech. I think it was very brief, and when you look at the content of the message, focusing on mentioning the efforts of the main opposition leader, former President J.A. Kufuor, and also another opposition leader, though not main, Dr. Edward Mahama, Nasigri Mahama, were present there. And also the fact that I heard Louis Farrakhan and his family was there. I was like, whoa, these people were there? I didn't notice. Probably I was too young to notice. I didn't know they were there. But I think it was brief, and for me, the focus on the opposition leaders who were there were very crucial, and I think he did it to underscore the importance and the milestone Ghana has chalked in its fledgling democracy. When you look at the 1996 election, it was very different from the 1992 election, and it was very crucial and critical for a free and fair election for two main reasons. First, because our democracy was to some extent incomplete, and second, free and fair election was very crucial or very important for us to push our multi-party democracy further. And so having a successful election alone, I think, was a lot of victory And I believe Mr. Rawlings wanted us to enjoy the peace and the victory and the peace that came with the victory, and not say so much to mar the joy and the peace the country was enjoying at the time because of its successful conduct of an election. I'll say it was a free election. I don't want to touch on the fair aspect. Maybe we discuss that later. Yeah.
That is, Doctor, for you. So then let's work out ourselves and our listeners on the path of how different the second term elections of the Fourth Republic looked.
Okay. Thank you very much. And yes, so for the Fourth Republic, as we noted last week, started 1992-93. President Rawlings won in 1993. Between 1993 and 1996, when the second elections in the Fourth Republic took place, there were many issues that came up. I believe there were a few of those to be discussed, but this one, because we are looking mainly at the elections, we want to concentrate on the elections. But I believe one or two other issues might come up. When they come up, we will try to discuss
in
them.
fact, I'm talking about election because that is what brought him into power. We had an inaugural speech.
Okay.
Then we'll see the things that happened during the tenure.
All right. So for the elections, J.J. Rawlings, there were some undercurrents going into the 1996 elections. Now, there was a fallout between the son of Efutu, Corkins and Akar, and Jerry John Rawlings, that Akar came up with some allegations. So now we'll say allegations because the NDC government never accepted some of those. And one of them was the fact that he had been denied powers as vice president. That as vice president, he was not allowed to operate as vice president. Where the president was not around, he was not allowed to chair meetings as vice president. And that some other official roles that the vice president was supposed to perform, he was denied those roles. And we asked a question that they went into the elections as an alliance. They were promised some seats. In fact, he took an Nkrumah's party to the NDC to join with the NDC to win elections. He had won elections, and as vice president, he was not allowed to work as he felt he should have been allowed to. Now, another was the fact that he was denied the official residence of the vice president. So as vice president, he was not given the official residence of the vice president, and he had a problem with it. I don't know, maybe if we want to look at the NDC, it looks like the NDC, and that thing has happened again after Jerry John Rawlings and Akar, that we had President Mahama not vacating the residence of the vice president for Pakwesi Mensah. You remember that? That he was still staying. In fact, President Mahama stayed in the vice president residence because he was vice president before he became president. He didn't vacate that particular facility. He was still there even as president. And we find, is it a trend within the NDC? I'm only asking questions. No mischief here.
Could it also not be that maybe comfort and understanding the environment is making it difficult for the person to live? But was Mr. Atta given an official residence?
Mr. Atta was with Bank of Ghana. So he also did not vacate the official residence of the governor.
So there could be something that we need to look for. Maybe comfort in the environment and you understanding where you are. You know, I mean, forced evictions are something.
Oh, but you are president. You can renovate your.
No, but you and I agree that, you see, when you live at a place and you enjoy the environment, when it becomes that you should move out, it's not an easy thing.
Well,
probably.
But
you only played at the devil's advocate too.
Yes, and that was a problem that Akar had, that he was not allowed to stay in the residence of the vice president.
That was built by the Republic for the vice president.
Official residence.
And who was living in that house?
In fact, I have not checked.
Well.
Then other issues. For instance, he claimed that he was assaulted some few occasions
in a meeting
by J.J. Rawlings. So I guess looking at the background of J.J. Rawlings and the kind of person that he was, Aka. So that was it. I wouldn't want to go into the details of that. So some few occasions, there were some few
rufflings. And,
yes. And it wouldn't be good between the president and the vice president. It wouldn't be good. And Aka felt that it was too much for him. So there was a fallout. And another was the NCP was given few ministerial and deputy ministerial positions. So in alliance, there were agreements that they would be given some ministerial and deputy ministerial positions. Unfortunately, after winning elections, they were denied. And this one, there was also, in reaction to the allegations that Aka was bringing to the public domain, the NDC also decided to come up with some few issues. And a major one that would dent the image of Aka would be a scandal, sex. That there was an alleged issue between, when you talk about sex, you talk about issue, you're talking about children. I don't mean children, but there was a sexual scandal with Jima Mayali and the vice president, Konkes and Aka, of which Aka would deny. But, it was also put up in a public domain. So it will shut him up a little. And he will leave the NDC to join the MPP in going into the 1996 elections. So for the undercurrents for the NDC, these were the issues that were simmering within the NDC. So Professor Mills had to come into the picture, that they now had to look for a replacement for Koke Sanaka. Now the NDC had been said to be a party, let me quote the words of John Domelo, that does not believe in intellectuals. So in order to present the NDC as a serious party that attracts intellectuals, that attract the best of brains, the NDC went for one of the best around that time, a law professor, Professor John Evans Mills.
But I thought last week we settled on that it was a strategy the NDC used to depict that they were all embracing, if I remember.
Sure. But why would they go for a professor? They went for a professor to tell you that we really believe in them. And I am told, when people talk about Jerry Rawlings, they said that he was a man who believed so much in academics.
Okay.
He believed in the brains they had and the solutions they were able to bring to the challenge that was facing Ghana in those days. So Jerry Rawlings, the founder of the party, was not someone who didn't believe in them. He worked with Dr. Weda Samoa, he worked with Dr. Kwesi Botwe, all those people. They were not from four leavers. They were people who were studied to the highest level. So yes, he did. And he brought in vice president. He came in with his gentle nature. He came in with that intellectual touch. He came in as an example of who a Christian in leadership should be. And that will do some trick for them. And as I said last week, this one, we see President Rawlings, a Catholic and a Christian. And we see Professor Mills,
a Methodist.
Yes, and a Christian. Going on that ticket, and they won elections.
But could it not be that they already had the grounds watered?
They had the grounds watered, yes, it is true. In 2008, the MPP, looking at the track record of John Ajekunkofo, MPP shouldn't have lost that election, but they lost. So it's not about you having enough done. It's about you doing what it matters most in winning elections. So I believe the NDC...
It's not about you doing... I love what you say.
It's not just about you doing enough that to win elections.
Okay.
But it's about doing what matters on election, during the electioneering period in order to win elections.
Okay.
And I think that the NDC, yes, there were some few other issues. The incumbency advantage, still there were issues of intimidation of the position and all. But the NDC did quite a lot of work and they won elections in 1996.
Okay. Yes.
Okay. So
Events. Oh, you are not done yet. Sorry.
Let Dr. Maliha.
Okay.
Then I will come back. Yes.
Okay. So, events leading up to the 1996 election, the 1996 election itself, and so on. I think already Dr. AMANOR has given us a brief refresher on the 1992 election. I would I mean, between 1993 and 1996, he has given us a refresher on what transpired. I would also want to take it from there and just add a little to that before maybe I move on to other aspects. So you would realize that Jerry Rawlings and the NDC tried their best to uphold the 1992 Constitution, and to a greater extent, they fulfilled most of the
promises they made.
Not promises, most of the constitutional provisions.
Okay.
Especially those pertaining to institutions of state, setting up those institutions, because the 1992 Constitution was largely the constitution that provided guidelines as to how certain institutions should be set up. And those institutions were necessary for the uptake of our democracy. And so, to a greater extent, the NDC fulfilled those constitutional provisions. It should also be mentioned that there were instances that the NDC did not, on its own, fulfill those provisions. Some instances, the court had to come in to compel them to fulfill certain constitutional provisions. And then, so that said, you would see that because of the existence of the 1992 Constitution and maybe the interest or the willingness of the NDC and Rawlings to really ensure that the new democracy succeeds, you realize that the opposition, though were not in parliament, but were very vibrant and actually criticized the government when the need be, or provided a lot of pressure on the government to be on its toes and to do the right things. And so you see that we did not have opposition in parliament, but we had an active opposition in the country. And this point is very important to raise because the vibrancy of the opposition between 1993 and 1996 sets a very fertile ground for a highly competitive election in 1996. And so the opposition, apart from putting pressure on government, I think there was also a very vibrant independent media. It was no longer just GBC. By 1996, we had private radio stations and even some TV stations coming up. And so the opposition parties also had their voices. Even though the ruling party controlled GBC, at least there were other avenues that opposition parties could sell their ideas and could also criticize the government of the day when they went wrong. And so with a vibrant media, with a vibrant opposition, a very good grounds was set for 1996 election. Now I would come to the 1996 election itself. It was a very interesting election. As I said earlier on, it was an important election, very crucial for two reasons. First, because our democracy was very new and was not totally complete. And second, because we needed to successfully organize a free and fair election to push and propel our multi-party democracy further. Because of these two reasons, the 1996 election actually had a lot of interest, generated a lot of interest globally or internationally, to the extent that you will see every aspect of the election or every aspect of the activities that were carried out by the Independent Electoral Commission were sponsored by international donors. And I think we should recognize the magnanimity of Jerry Rawlings here by allowing these international donors to support the Electoral Commission without so much, how would I say, rebellion.
Friction or rebellion.
Yes. But then somebody would ask, did he have a choice? Because if he opposed it, the IMF and the other funders could also call back. So it would look like he didn't have much of a choice than to allow the international donors to come in to help.
Now, but could it also not be that he was also trying to leave a legacy that he has nurtured the democracy and it was growing?
That is a fact we cannot run away from. And so, I mean, partly because he really didn't have a choice, and partly because he also really wants to leave a legacy. Maybe going further, you would see that his actions and inactions were actually geared toward what? Having a free and fair election, to prove the fact that the 1992 election was won squarely and that he didn't cheat. And so maybe when we go further, some of these things would come up. I just want to highlight some of the areas that international donors or countries came in to support the Electoral Commission, just to ensure that we had a free and fair election. They were very much interested in building a democracy.
Perfect.
Yeah. And so, for example, you would see that for the first time we had transparent ballot boxes that were used in the election, and you see this was funded by Denmark, just the transparent ballot boxes. And then we also had security ballot bags and box seals, and these was provided by Switzerland. Our ballot papers were funded by Canada, our communication equipment by Belgium, our registration forms and computer scanners were funded by Britain, and then we also had registration, that's the registration form and computer scanners by Britain, computer software by France, and then multimedia CD-ROM computers to read the digital registry was funded by the United States. And even USAID and Danida provided a lot of funds to support both the Electoral Commission and the National Commission for Civic Education to educate people on how to vote properly. And so in all, it is estimated that over $23 million was spent by outsiders to micromanage the election, just to ensure that it was free and fair. As to whether it was free and fair, I'm sure we'll look at it later. Looking at the main contenders of the 1996 election, I think basically three major presidential candidates were put up. So we had the Progressive Alliance by the NDC, and then the EGLE, and then the DPP. We had the Great Alliance by NPP and NCP, and we also had Edward Mahama's PNC. Already, Dr. AMANOR LARTEY touched on how a former president under the NDC ended up.
A former vice president.
A former vice president under NDC ended up as a running mate to the NPP. And also the fact that he was coming from an Nkrumah's background, aligning with a political party that had antagonized the CPP for a very long time. So I think that has been touched on. I don't have to belabor that again. But then it would appear that the NPP was generally tipped to win the election. They were tipped to win the election for several reasons. One was that though the NPP did not really have any different message, very different message in terms of economic and social policies, they didn't have a very different message from the NDC, because largely you would see that former President Kufuor and his NPP also believed in the structural adjustment program. Largely they believed in that, but they felt that they had better brains. They had the experts. The NPP has, I mean, that has always been their anthem. They have the men. Yes. So they felt that they had the men better than the NDC to implement the structural adjustment program. But not only that, though their economic policy measures were not very different from the NDC, there were other issues in the economy they were using against the NDC. For example, they told us to look at our economic conditions when we are going to vote. This was a time, and it's like a deja vu. Whatever happened in 1996, we are reliving it in this period.
In fact, I was going to come to that. I realized that in 1996, during the voter registration, they opened well over 19,000 centers for the registration. And that gave a very large coverage of almost about 9.2 1 million voters. What are we having today? For limited registration. Never mind. That was just cutting through.
All right. Okay. So it's like all right. So let me just go on. Maybe we'll come to that. Yeah. So as I was saying, the NPP told us to look at our condition. How do you say it? All right. So we had to look at our condition and vote very well. That was what they told Ghanaians. And I mean, this was not just said out of, let me say, it wasn't just said for pleasure, because when you look at the conditions at the time, things were hard, very hard, to the extent that inflation was as high as 50%, but getting closer to 1996, I think it was reduced to 48%.
It dropped a little.
Look at where we are. We are around 48%. We are dying, man. So you can imagine, around that time, it was 48%. In fact, the currency was depreciating at its best at the time. And also, we are told that the country that used to have economic growth of over 5% had reduced to 4.5%. And also, there were perception of corruption in the country at the time.
That was really trumpeted.
Yes, perception of corruption at the time, though not widespread as it is today. There were perceptions, but Ghanaians actually bought into the message of the NPP. And the NDC realized that the message of the NPP was actually catching up, and people were beginning to fall for the message that the NPP was giving out. And so they had to sit up. Otherwise, they felt they could actually lose the elections. So what did they do? They realized that they had to put up a strong showing in Parliament, not just in terms of numbers, but in terms of the brains that they contribute to Parliament. Because this time around, they were very sure that the NPP was going to contest in the parliamentary elections. And the caliber of people that were coming into Parliament were going to be very smart, highly educated people. And so they had to match the NPP with such caliber of parliamentarians. So what the NDC did was to ask certain parliamentary candidates not to contest again. I'm told, I think I read about 75 of them. And this brewed some kind of discontent within the NDC. So some of them even threatened to go independent. But knowing Rawlings, a military man, he pushed them to what? To come back, to conform to what the party wanted.
But you know that he knew how to do it.
Well, I mean, he's in power. And if you choose to go independent and you go independent and lose, you won't get anything from the party. But if you conform to the party line and you say, okay, I agree, I won't go, whoever you want should go, probably they would give you some DCE position somewhere, or a deputy ministerial position, or a CEO position somewhere. So he didn't necessarily had to force them. They had to use their brains. You go against him and then you lose what? Completely. And so these were some of the things. And then but then though the NPP was tipped to win, as I said, the NDC had to up their game. One action was trying to make sure that they had the right people in Parliament. But then another thing was that they really showed up with all the resources they had. I mean, they were in power. The state resources was at their disposal. The vehicles, the ministerial vehicles, and so on. They deployed it everywhere, and that they.
So the fact of abuse of incumbency did not start today.
That is it. It started then. I think I'm told for the first time Ghanaians had never witnessed such flamboyance and such extravagance in terms of election campaigns. So you had mass and mammoth rallies. I think it was during that period that we started seeing such rallies, busing people from every village. I think though I was a kid, I saw it. In Tamale, whenever they had rallies, you had people being brought in from Savulugu, from Yendi, from Kumbungu, from wherever you can mention. They bussed people in. And this really intimidated the NPP. They did not have the resources. And so incumbents played a very big role. They had the resources and they used it to their advantage. And that's how come, though pundits tipped the NPP to win, the reason why they did not actually win the elections. But not only that, the NDC, we cannot take away the fact that they actually did very well in terms of developmental initiatives. And they really played on that card in certain parts of the country to win. When you take Ashanti was tipped to vote for the NPP. Volta was tipped to vote for the NPP.
NDC.
Sorry, the NDC. Central and Western. In fact,
Were
were hoping that they would vote for NPP because of the alliance between Aka and then Akufo. Sorry, I said Akufo and J. Akufo. And for Eastern and Brongahafo, people were not very sure.
So those were the swing regions.
That is it, where their vote was going to be. But the northern regions too, they had voted for Upper East and Upper West had voted for Liman in the earlier election. Yeah. But then the NDC was hopeful that it had actually done enough, especially in the Brongahafo, supporting farmers with fertilizers and so on. They were hoping Brongahafo would vote for them. They were also hoping that they had actually done a lot of development, especially construction of roads, rural electrification in the north. So Rawlings was banging his hopes on the fact that he had brought some level of development to the three northern regions.
FQ was started.
Yes,
seriously.
that was the time FQ was started. And so some of these policies, and in fact, people still had it in their minds. Seeing Rawlings clean gutters with them, they still remember him as that, would I
Messiah.
say, yeah, who was still there. And so NDC, at least the developmental programs they had done, they could use it as campaign message to ask the people to what? To vote for them again. And so I want to believe largely the people voted, especially though we thought the numbers in the north was not that huge, but they ended up voting for the NDC massively. I believe Brongahafo also voted for the NDC. Volta voted for the NDC. I don't remember very well about Central and Eastern, but I think they also voted for the NDC. The NDC won there. So in the end, you had NDC winning in about 8 of the regions or so. And so it shouldn't surprise us that they came out victorious, yeah, in the election.
I guess one thing you missed out was the 31st December Women's Movement factor.
Yes, and I think we can tie that into the use of state resources. Yes, because 31st Women Movement was more or less like a ministry for women, women and gender. What do we call women ministry for women's affairs. I mean, for the country, though. It was meant to be for
women
NDC.
And children.
Women and children, in fact. So it was just an offshoot of the NDC, but it behaved like a state institution, and also it actually had access to state resources. And so, yeah, that also played a crucial role.
Well, I can remember that it's 1st December daycare centers that were spreading all around.
You know, in Tamale, we used to call it Ngangwune. Yeah.
Meaning?
It's like, it means they do not discriminate against anybody. Anyone could attend that school.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I think these were some of the things that played out. And after everything was done, the NDC won the election again with about 57% of the votes. And in Parliament, they did very well again, though this time their numbers reduced. I think this time around they had 133 seats, and then losing about 59, because earlier they had 189 seats. So, and this time around the NPP had about, was it 86 seats or so? And you see why I said the NPP did not do Ghana and the first parliament of Ghana any good by staying out of the parliamentary election. Look at the votes they had. Look at the seats they had. They could have won those same number of seats, if not more, in the 1992 election. And so I think I will rest here, and then
a comfortable rest it is.
Yeah.
So that Nene can continue from where you left off. After which we'll have Anamwa come to give us the first translations.
Thank you very much. Yes, as Dr. Maliha has done, you see, for the 1996 elections, the elections came and it was always going to be hotly contested. But there is an interesting thing about the MPP that could have contributed to their loss, in that going into a crucial election like that, they did not bring a candidate, they did not select a candidate early.
0.3 FM.
Now, even as incumbent, they want to select a candidate almost a year, in fact, a year clear of the election day. But what happened in 1996 was that they were able to settle on their candidate in September, when the elections was to be in December. Coming from opposition, you are not presenting the same candidate as was presented in 1992. You are presenting a different candidate. And even the selection of that candidate was a problem. Here you have a certain vice president leaving the party that made him vice president and joining opposition. Now there was a problem. Who becomes their candidate? Were they going to make the certain vice president a running mate? Or they want to make a certain vice president who has fought with the certain president and his party the candidate? That was the issue. And the MPP...
Let me just seek some clarification here. So you want our listeners to really understand the picture clearer. Sure. That even at the time that he, Paul Nkensen Aka, was the vice president, the tenure had not ended.
No.
When he walked out to join MPP.
Sure. So he was vice president.
Okay.
When he became running mate for the opposition. And interestingly, in fact, as Dr. Maliha alluded earlier, you see that he belonged to an Nkrumah's party. How can Nkrumah's, right from 1949, there have been serious antagonism between the NPP, sorry, the Abuzia, like the UP tradition, and the Nkrumah's tradition. Here comes a gentleman who says, I'm bringing an Nkrumah's party. Let's have a marriage. Nkrumah's with the Dankabuzia. And the MPP was the largest opposition party
at the
then.
time.
And the Nkrumah's wanted to become the candidate.
The presidents, they wanted
the presidential candidate
slot
for the alliance. And well,
it will be fought.
It will be fought. So the jostling went on until in September, when they settled on John Ajekum Kufuor. J.A. Kufuor was new as candidate. He had only 3 months.
But I guess we have to put on record that J.A. had worked in the government of
the PNDC.
PNDC.
Yeah.
Yes, but he was not. He did not work in a department or in a ministry that will put him in a limelight, like finance. No, but even though he served, yes, he served Chairman J.J. Rawlings when it was the PNDC. But he comes in with the MPP and he becomes candidate September, elections December. So you look at this, coupled with the time was short and they didn't have resources. The Rawlings will also not allow those in exile to return. They had the resources; they wouldn't come. So in a way, their supplies was cut. Another thing.
So you want to allude that the funding was supposed to come from outside for them to have prosecuted
their friends who had traveled, who had run away because of Jerry Rawlings. Some businessmen, they had to, run for their lives. So those people, they were the UP tradition, those who were industrialists and all, they had run away. There was no way they could have come to help. And on top of that, we see an NDC incumbent exploiting, in fact, if there's anywhere like over-exploiting the incumbency advantage. And when people complain, what I tell them is that when the president is moving, as a matter of state protocol, state media must follow. Not just that. He needs security. They will follow.
In fact, security is ahead,
exactly,
before and after.
Exactly. And you expect some a convoy. It is done everywhere. When he moves like that, they will tell you that he is over-exploiting incumbency. Do we expect a president to go in 2 cars?
In fact, is it not that we who put the constitution together that should be given the president?
Yes. In fact, he's the first gentleman of the land, the commander-in-chief. Where the commander-in-chief is going,
the whole army must follow.
Yes, the army will make sure he's safe. So these things happened, and it was exploited. Yes, but yes, that was a reality. It happened, and it didn't go too well for the MPP in the elections. But with the reforms that came, photo ID card was introduced, which was able to cut off some voters, those who were very young, and it will be clear that those who came to impersonate others, because it was a photo ID, there was no way I will go to a polling station, your polling station, and say that, well, I am Collins AWUKU, and will allow me to vote, because the ID card I'll be bearing will not be the photo ID of the Collins AWUKU they have on their register. So that was able to reduce the fraud in terms of the voters register.
The purported fraud.
Purported fraud. Thank you, journalists, and the way you talk. You have the facts, but you say purported because you don't want trouble. Transparent ballot boxes that MALIHA has made
98.3 FM,
and a single day for elections. So with this, not just that. One other thing that also did not help the cause of the MPP going into the 1996 elections was the fact that the alliance in some polling stations, in some constituencies, the NPP fielded
for parliament, and they also fielded.
Yes. So there are 2 different candidates for parliamentary seats. Yet presidential, they were together. So that will tell you the confusion that was in that alliance right from the beginning, that they could not iron out some of these differences, because some felt that, well, this is an area that
CPP was stronger.
Yes, that we could win. And the MPP, to be an MPP, the biggest opposition party then, also would not bat. They would also want to field a candidate they feel will be able to win elections for them. So that became a little bit of an issue. Now, the presidential candidate, John Ajekun Kufuor, when he became candidate, will now have to move round. And as I said earlier, then candidate J. Kufuor was relatively new.